Arizona Territory, 1883. The wind carried dust and silence through the broken windows of Eden Creek's Main Street, where tumbleweeds rolled like forgotten prayers. Celia Vaughn crept through the deserted town with her shawl drawn tight, boots crunching on cracked boards. The church door hung off its hinge. The saloon sign dangled by one chain. Not a soul stirred. Not since the fever swept through 2 weeks ago, taking her father, the preacher, and leaving behind nothing but ghosts and dry wind. She had not planned to return, but she had nowhere else to go. Her hands trembled as she pushed open the door to the general store. Shelves were half empty, the floor thick with dust. She stepped over a broken jug, heart pounding. The last time she had been here, her father had stood by the counter, arguing over the price of flour. Now the counter stood empty, and so did the town, until a horse stepped into the silence. Celia froze. The hoofbeats were steady, slow. She peered through a crack in the window, breath caught in her throat. A man dismounted in front of the livery. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a rifle across his back and dust on his coat. He scanned the street like he expected someone to come out shooting. Celia ducked, her back pressed to the wall. "Anyone here?" His voice was low, steady. "I am not looking for trouble." She hesitated. Then slowly she stood and pushed open the door. He turned. Their eyes met. He did not reach for his rifle. He just stared, surprise flickering across his face. "You are real." "I live here," she said, her voice cracked. "Lived." He took off his hat. His hair was dark, thick from the sun. "Name's Nolan Carrigan. I run a cattle ranch half a day south. I heard what happened, thought I would check if anyone was left." Celia nodded once. Her legs felt unsteady. Nolan stepped closer. "You all right?" "I buried my father in the churchyard last week," she said. "I have not eaten in 2 days." He looked at her, then not just at the dirt on her skirt or the tired in her eyes, but at her. "Come with me. I have food, water, a place to sleep that is not falling apart." She blinked, startled. "Why?" "Because no one should be left behind like this." He offered his arm. She stared at it. Then slowly she took it. They rode together under the wide Arizona sky, Celia behind him on his horse, her cheek brushing the back of his coat. She was too tired to be afraid. The rhythm of the horse lulled her into quiet. She had not touched another person in days. The warmth of his back, the steady thump of his heartbeat, she clung to it like it could hold her together. His ranch stood at the edge of scrubland, a long slope of green against the brown. The house was simple, wood-framed with a wraparound porch. 2 horses grazed by the fence. A boy and girl sat on the steps, their legs swinging. "Papa," the boy shouted, jumping up. "You said you would be back yesterday." "I got held up," Nolan said as he dismounted. He turned to help Celia down. "This is Celia. She is going to stay with us for a bit." The girl, maybe 10, stepped forward and tilted her head. "Is she sick?" "No," Celia said, managing a small smile. "Just tired." Nolan set a hand on the boy's shoulder. "This is Peter, he is 8, and this is Penelope." "She just turned 10. Celia's heart tightened. She glanced at Nolan. "They are yours," he nodded. "Their mother died 5 years ago, fever." "I am sorry," he shrugged, but his eyes softened. "We manage." Peter looked up at her. "Are you going to help with the chickens?" Celia blinked. "I suppose I can." Penelope reached for her hand. "Come on, they are loud, but they do not bite." Inside, the house smelled of coffee and wood smoke. Celia sat at the table while Nolan poured her a cup and set a plate of cornbread down in front of her. She ate slowly, feeling warmth creep back into her limbs. "You can stay as long as you need," Nolan said quietly. "This house has room." "I do not want to be a burden." "You are not." She looked up, met his eyes. Something in her chest shifted. The days passed in rhythm, feeding chickens, hanging laundry, helping Penelope with her reading. Nolan worked the pastures and rode fence lines, but he always came back by dusk. They ate together, the 4 of them, and Celia began to smile without thinking. She started brushing Penelope's hair at night, showing Peter how to mend his shirt sleeves. One evening after supper, she stepped out onto the porch. The sun was low, the sky streaked with orange. Nolan stood by the fence, arms crossed, watching the horizon. She walked to him. He looked at her, and something quiet passed between them. "This place," she said, "feels more like home than anything has in a long time," he nodded. "I am glad," she hesitated. "I do not know what comes next." "I do," he said simply. "You stay if you want." She turned to him. "You barely know me." "I know enough. You are strong, kind. The children adore you, so do I." Her breath caught. He stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I want you here, not just for a few days, for good." Her chest ached with something new, hope. "I never thought I would have this," she whispered. "A home, a future, you can," he said. "With me." She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time in years she believed it. "I want to stay," she said. He slid his hand into hers. "Then you are home." By early May, the mesquite trees were leafing out, and the creek behind Nolan's barn ran clear with snowmelt from the mountains. Celia stood knee-deep in the vegetable patch behind the house, her skirt hitched with a clothespin and her hands sunk in the soil. A row of beans had taken well, and the squash were beginning to vine. The sun warmed her shoulders, and for the first time in years, she'd begun humming under her breath without meaning to. Nolan stepped out of the barn, wiping his hands with a rag. "You put those seeds in tighter rows than I ever managed." "I grew up planting between sermons," Celia said without looking up. "My father believed idle hands led to foolishness." He didn't answer right away. When she glanced up, he was watching her not the way a man stares when he's curious, but with something quieter. He folded the rag over his hand and leaned on the fence. "Peter asked me this morning if you were going to leave when the harvest came in." Celia sat back on her heels. "What did you tell him?" "I said it wasn't up to me." She looked down at the dark line of beans. "I haven't made up my mind." "Yes, you have," he said gently. The breeze moved between them. A hawk cried somewhere above the ridge. He pushed away from the fence. "I'm riding north tomorrow. Cattle auction past the ridge near Fort Verde. I'll be gone 3 days." She brushed dirt from her palms. "Who'll help Penelope with the laundry?" She said she'd teach you to fold linens the proper way. Celia laughed, a low, easy sound that surprised her. "She's particular about corners." Nolan smiled, then stepped close enough she could see the sun lines around his eyes. "I left a letter with the county clerk last spring. If anything ever happened to me, I wanted the court to know who should see to the children." Her smile faded. "I never expected anyone else to come along," he continued, voice steady. "But if anything ever changes, if you do stay, I'd want that letter to say your name too." She wet her lips, unsure what to do with the weight sitting behind her ribs. "Your children have lost enough." "I wouldn't go unless I had to." "You wouldn't have to," he said. "Not anymore." That night, she sat beside Penelope on the porch swing, helping her braid a strip of calico into a doll's dress. The girl's brow furrowed in concentration. "Papa said you used to live in a church," Penelope said, not looking up. "I did. My father was a minister." "Did you ever want to be one too?" Celia smiled faintly. "No, but I liked the quiet in the pews when the sun came through the windows." Penelope nodded as though that made perfect sense. "I think Papa likes you more than he liked Miss Hester from the Trading Post." "I didn't know he liked Miss Hester at all." "He didn't," Penelope said. "She talked loud and smelled like pickles." Celia laughed again, then caught herself. She hadn't known she had that much laughter left. By the time Nolan rode out at dawn, Celia had packed bread and dried apples into his saddlebag without being asked. He left a note on the kitchen table in his careful hand, listing fence repairs he wanted Peter to help with and a reminder to check the smokehouse roof if it rained. 2 days passed. The children fell into rhythm easily, and Celia learned how Nolan liked his tools hung in the shed and which crock held the salt. That second evening, Peter climbed into her lap after supper with a book about buffalo and stayed there until his breathing slowed and his thumbs slipped from his mouth. The house felt too quiet with Nolan gone. She didn't admit it aloud, but she watched the ridge more than once, listening for a horse. On the 3rd day, she was sweeping the porch when she heard hoofbeats. She stepped down into the yard, shielding her eyes. Nolan's chestnut gelding trotted into view, dust on its flanks. Nolan sat the saddle like he always did, loose and sure. When he saw her waiting, he lifted one hand and her heart lifted with it. He dismounted, patting the horse's neck before walking toward her. "Got a good price on 3 calves," he said. "Better than I expected." She reached for the reins. "You look worn thin, only from sleeping on bedrolls. I'll get water." "I'd rather sit with you a minute." They walked to the edge of the porch. He eased down onto the top step, stretching his legs. She stood beside him, arms folded. "I thought about you while I was gone," he said without looking up. Celia sat beside him, close enough their elbows brushed. "What did you think?" "That it was the first time I'd wanted to come home to someone in a long while." She looked straight ahead, heart steady and full. "I've been wondering what it would feel like to belong somewhere again." He turned his head. And she didn't need to search for her answer. "It feels like this." His fingers brushed hers, searching and sure. She laced her hand through his. They stayed like that until the sun dipped behind the hills and the children's laughter drifted out from the kitchen. The June heat settled like a sleeping hound, heavy and unmoving. By mid-afternoon, the sky had bleached pale, and the cottonwood leaves along the creek barely rustled. Celia stood at the washbasin behind the house, sleeves rolled, wringing out a shirt of Nolan's that had gone stiff with dust at the collar. The rhythm of the work steadied her thoughts. Down by the barn, Nolan and Peter were mending a gate bracket that had split clean through. The rasp of the file drifted up the slope, now and again replaced by Peter's questions and Nolan's quiet replies. Celia wrung the shirt once more and hung it from the line that stretched between 2 cedar posts. The air smelled of soap, warmed wood, and faintly of creosote from the fence rails. She stepped inside, wiping her hands on her apron. Penelope sat on the floor with a basket of peach pits, sorting the firm ones from those that had begun to dry out. "Are you boiling the jars?" Celia asked. "Yes, ma'am, I'm doing it like you showed me," the girl said without looking up. "Papa said we can use the root cellar now." "He swept it out this morning." Celia crouched beside her, examining a pit. "These'll take if we plant them come next spring. You've a good eye for what will keep." Penelope's voice dropped a little. "Will you still be here in the spring?" Celia touched the girl's wrist lightly. "I plan to be." Penelope nodded once and went back to sorting. That evening, after the children had gone to bed and the fire on the hearth had burned down to a soft glow, Celia sat cross-legged on the porch with a spindle of wool in her lap. Nolan leaned against the post, arms folded, one boot resting on the step below. "You didn't say much at supper," he said. "I was listening." "To what?" "Peter. He was explaining how you fix the gate. He talks fast when he's proud." Nolan watched her fingers turn the wool. "You were quiet when you came here. Now you speak like you've always belonged." She set the spindle down. "I'm still learning what I sound like when I'm not afraid." He shifted, drawing one knee up. "What were you afraid of?" "Waking up alone, mostly." "Carrying too much and not knowing where to set it down." He nodded, silent for a while. Then, without looking at her, he said, "There's a woman in town who used to keep books for the land office. Miss Erline. She's old now, but she handles marriage filings for the county since the clerk rides out to Prescott twice a month." Celia didn't move. The fire's glow cast a soft light across the porch, and somewhere, a night bird called once and went still. "You thinking of filing something?" she asked, voice quiet. "I was," he said, "but only if you mean to stay for good. I wouldn't ask otherwise." She folded her hands in her lap. "I was taught that a man should lead his household. But I think I'd rather walk beside someone than follow behind. I never wanted a woman to trail me," he said. "I want someone who sees the same sky." That settled in her chest like a stone against soft earth. She rose slowly, stepped to the edge of the porch, and looked out across the yard. The moon was low, casting long shadows over the corral. The barn door hung open, and she could see Nolan's saddle hanging just inside. "I never pictured my life ending in Arizona," she said. "But I never thought it could begin here either." He stood behind her, close enough to feel the warmth of him through her dress. "I'll ride into town next Thursday," he said. "If you want your name in that ledger, I'll make sure it's written with mine." She turned to face him. There's no one else I'd write it beside. The hush between them was not empty, it held promise, like the first summer rain when you can smell it before it touches the ground. He reached for her hand, and this time she laced her fingers with his without hesitation. Inside, the house was quiet, the children asleep, the hearth still warm. Outside, the land stretched wide and waiting, and for the first time, every door in Celia's heart felt open. The sun rode high over the ridge as Thursday settled into late morning, and Nolan's boots thudded lightly against the packed dirt of the town's main road. Celia kept her hand tucked into the crook of his arm as they walked side by side. Eden Creek had not changed much since she'd left it behind weathered buildings, quiet porches, and a church with a leaning steeple, but it no longer looked like a place that had quit living. It looked like a place that remembered. The door to Miss Erline's office groaned open on its hinges. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of ink and sun-dried paper. Miss Erline sat at her desk, spectacles low on her nose, her fingers ink-stained and steady. She looked up, then down again without comment, as if she'd expected them all along. "We'll need the ledger," Nolan said, removing his hat. Miss Erline slid open a drawer and pulled out the thick, bound book. She turned it to a fresh page and dipped her pen. "Full names." Nolan spoke first. "Nolan Carrigan." Celia's fingers tightened slightly against his arm, but her voice was clear. "Celia Ruth Vaughn." The pen scratched across the parchment. Miss Erline did not look up. "Date of union." Nolan glanced at Celia. Her nod was small but sure. "Today." The older woman finished her notes and closed the book with a soft thump. "I'll have the record sent to Prescott with the next mail rider. You'll want to speak to Reverend Klein if you want a blessing spoken over it." "We will," Nolan said. Outside, the heat pressed down again and dust curled around their boots. They walked in silence past the churchyard gate. Her father's grave stood beneath the old ironwood tree, the cross still upright. She paused beside the fence, her hand resting on the top rail. "I wish he'd met you," she said after a while. Nolan stayed beside her. "Do you think he'd have approved?" "He would have watched you for a long time before saying anything. Then he'd have offered you a cup of coffee and asked if your roof leaked. Then I'm glad I patched it last month." She smiled without looking at him. "I think he'd have liked that." They rode back as the afternoon deepened. The trail sloped along the creek, the water running low now, frogs clicking from the reeds. At the top of the last rise, they paused. Below, the house sat quiet, chimney smoking faintly. Celia drew her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "It feels different now." Nolan turned toward her. "What does?" Coming back. "The first time I thought I was just passing through something ruined. Now it feels like I crossed into something waiting." He didn't answer, but his hand brushed hers again, and she took it before he could pull away. The children met them at the gate. Penelope had flour on her sleeves and a streak across her cheek. "We tried to make pies. They're flat now." Peter held up a pan with a crust that had sunk in the middle like a dry well. "We didn't have lard, so we used butter and guessed." Celia crouched to examine it. "Well, it's still warm." "That counts. Did you do it?" Penelope asked. Celia looked to Nolan briefly, then nodded. "We wrote our names in the book." Peter squinted. "Does that mean you're our ma now?" Celia opened her mouth, then paused. "It means I'll be here for birthdays and coughs and lost buttons. It means I'll sit up when your stomach aches and I'll remember which blanket is yours. I think that's what makes a ma." Peter looked up at Nolan. "That's good enough, right?" Nolan's voice was quiet. "It's more than enough." That night, when the children were asleep and the lanterns dimmed, Celia stood barefoot in the kitchen, brushing crumbs from the table. The stars outside the window were thick and low, as if the sky had lowered itself just for them. Nolan came in behind her, his steps slow, deliberate. He paused at the doorway and watched her. She turned to face him, hands stilling on the cloth. "I keep waiting for this to shift," she said, "for something to crack open and remind me it's not real." "It's real," he said. "Every last piece of it." She stepped close and rested her head against his chest. He wrapped his arms around her without hesitation, and they stood that way for a long time, the air between them warm and still. I want to plant cotton next spring, she murmured. Just a small row. Enough for cloth. He leaned his chin on her hair. We'll plant it together. She closed her eyes. For the first time in years, there was nothing left to run from, only the wide land, the steady man who had offered her his future, and the quiet certainty that she had stepped into something lasting. Celia stitched the final seam of Peter's new work shirt as the last light of summer slid down the walls of the sitting room. Her needle moved steady through the homespun, her thimble worn smooth from the season's work. A faint breeze stirred the lace curtain by the window, carrying the scent of turned hay from the west field. When the last thread was tied, she folded the shirt and set it on the bench beside the hearth, then rose and stretched her back. Outside, the yard had gone quiet. The chickens were roosting, and the children had already been sent to bed with warm cider and clean feet. Nolan had stayed out past dusk, checking the fence along the southern boundary after a neighbor reported spotting stray cattle the day before. She stepped onto the porch and found him there, seated on the top stair with his boots off and his arms resting on his knees. The moon hung low, casting soft silver on the ridgeline. He didn't turn when she came near, but she could tell by the way his shoulders shifted that he'd heard her. "Did you find any breaks?" she asked. "3. 2 were easy enough to patch. 1 needs new posts altogether." She lowered herself beside him. Her skirt brushed his leg and he leaned against her just enough to say he'd missed her presence. "I spoke with Mrs. Hindley this morning," she said after a long pause. "She's offered to let Penelope visit her once a week to learn piano, says her old hands are too stiff now and she'd like to pass the songs on." Nolan turned his head slightly. "That girl's been humming to herself since spring. Might do her good to learn the rest of the notes." "She's already memorized the hymn book," Celia said, brushing her hair from her cheek. "I think she's ready for something that belongs to her alone." He was quiet a moment before he spoke again. "Peter wants to build a bird blind near the creek. Says he's seen quail roosting there in the evenings. You'll let him?" "I told him he could show me the spot tomorrow. We'll take the saw." She laced her fingers through his. "You make them feel like their ideas count." "They do," he said. "The world's hard enough. A boy ought to grow up knowing his thoughts matter." The wind picked up slightly, rustling the grass beyond the fence. Celia leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder. "I've been thinking too." "About what?" "About building a second room off the back of the house, not a large one. Enough for a loom and a place to sit when it's too cold to work outside." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "You've already drawn the plans in your head, haven't you?" "I've measured the wall 3 times. He chuckled, a low sound that warmed her chest. "Then we'll start after the first frost. I'll saw the planks if you tell me where to place them." The porch creaked beneath them as they shifted, bodies relaxed into one another. When he reached for her waist, she let him draw her closer. "I've never known a peace like this," she whispered. "Not even as a girl." "You built it with your own hands," he said. "It's yours as much as mine." She let the words settle, deep and sure. "Do you ever think about what might have been different?" He shook his head. "I wouldn't trade a single step that led to you." She kissed him then, soft and sure, not hurried, not uncertain. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "We should sleep," he said. "The sun'll be up before we know it." "I know," she said, "but I'd like to sit a little longer. Just here." They stayed on the porch until the moon dipped behind the ridge and the coyotes called from the distant hills. Years passed, and the land stretched green after long rains. The cotton row behind the barn grew tall, and Celia's loom sang through winter afternoons. Penelope learned every song Mrs. Hindley remembered and added her own. Peter built his bird blind and learned to track the seasons by the sounds in the trees. The house grew by a room and then another, each board nailed with care, each corner square. One spring morning, Celia stood at the south window, hands folded over the curve of her belly, watching Nolan walk back from the barn with Peter at his side and Penelope just behind. Her hair tied back with the same ribbon Celia had worn the day she signed the ledger in town. When Nolan saw Celia, he raised a hand, not in greeting but in quiet knowing. She smiled, and it reached every part of her. Inside the house, the fire crackled low. Bread rose on the hearth, and the smell of sage from the garden drifted in through the open door. The past was behind her, the road long walked and done. She had crossed into her own life at last, and it held.